On today's episode of the Command Center podcast, we have a Hall of Fame edition. Bram Weinstein joins us for Joe Jacoby and why he should be in the Hall of Fame. Man, we were excited to talk to Bram. He did a great job defending his case. And then, man, nothing is more important than get teammates to come and vouch for you.
Yeah.
And we got a great Joe Jacoby teammate. That's Doug Williams. He comes by and gives his testament as to why Joe should be in the Hall of Fame.
And watch us surprise him, too.
It all starts right now. Welcome into the Command Center podcast. I'm Logan Paulson here with Fred Smoot, Santana Moss, and our very special guest, the voice of the Washington Commanders, Bram Weinstein. Thanks for coming, Bram. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Always good to see you.
Excellent having you here, man. We're going to talk a little bit about, some people who deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. And Bram has been a fan maybe longer than anybody I know on the beat. And so his insight's going to be really helpful when talking about this individual. But in the meantime, we got some things we got to talk about. We got the live show coming up, CC Podcast. That's this pod. Live Friday, June 20th at the Muni. We got merch giveaways, and we have a surprise legend coming. So if you like surprises, and you like merch, and you like us, please join us at the Muni on June 20th, right? Any thoughts on that, Fred?
Hey, listen, be there or be square.
Be there or be square. I think that's excellent. And then we got our mega mailbag coming up. And you guys have been giving us questions on Instagram and Twitter. It's hard for us to get all those questions together.
Yeah.
So make sure for those questions, you go to ThatHawkOutside, spelled out, at gmail.com. Leave your questions. We want to have an interactive experience when we do the mailbag. We want to make sure we get to everybody's questions. And so that's the best way to do that. ThatHawkOutside at gmail.com.
Yes.
All right. Now, we've done this a couple weeks in a row now. This is the most important thing of the announcements.
It is.
Get your Commanders tickets now.
Through us.
But, do it through us, right?
Yes.
You see that little QR code down here in the corner, right? Yeah. Let's make sure we use that one because it helps us out.
Yes.
They say, oh, wow, people really watch this show. They're
buying tickets through this show.
Through the show. It helps us, helps our budget, helps us out.
Yeah.
Make sure you do that. And then, right, we've got RFK Stadium news. We're all excited about that. I know Bram's excited about that, right, Bram? So if you want updates, visit commanders.com /new stadium where you can sign up to learn more and show your support. That's important. The ownership wants to know that you guys want this. We want this. We assume you guys want this. So let's make sure.
Hashtag bring the guys home. Bring the guys home.
Hashtags.
Yes. Bring the fellas
Hashtag
home.
best defensive back in Mississippi State.
So that's it. Live show, mailbag, tickets, QR code. That's really important.
Yes.
And then if you want stadium updates, check out commanders.com /new stadium. Now, the reason you're all here.
Yes.
I don't know if you're all here for this. I don't know if we even teased this on the last show, but we're talking Hall of Fame, and we're talking
HOF.
Hall of Fame for someone who, at least in my mind, doesn't get enough love, and that's Joe Jacoby.
Well, I'm going to say, first of all, offensive linemen in general don't get enough love. And we're talking about the past. All right, so now we're talking about an older offensive lineman in a time where the new offensive linemen don't get the love that they deserve. So, we're here to talk about it.
And I just looked through kind of getting ready for the show, like who makes the Hall of Fame as an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
And it's literally like, if you're the best dude of your generation,
That's it.
you're in.
Yeah,
First ballot.
Pretty slim pickings after that, which is tough. And I think that's kind of why this is so hard for Joe, it feels like.
So let me start this conversation in a place that I think it should be, which is, and I think there's a number of players. I think every organization can say this, but London Fletcher should be in the Hall of Fame. Brian Mitchell should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't think Gary Clark or Larry Brown will ever get in because of the age, but they should be in the Hall of Fame too.
Yeah.
But Joe Jacoby tops the list, and I would start this conversation this way, because I know you're going to say make a case for him. I would flip it and say back to the Hall of Fame voters, explain to me why he's not in.
Yes.
Really, this isn't about, because I could write for days about what Joe Jacoby meant to the team, what he was for this team, the accomplishments. You want stats? I have them. You want iconic plays? I have them. You want iconic moments, part of iconic units? I have them. You want one of the most incredible come-from-nowhere stories you've ever heard of? I have it for you. Yeah. So I'd like to hear from the voters, why is he not in the Hall of Fame? Why do I have to sit here and tell you how great he was every single year when anybody who knows this sport should know that? So he's at the top of the list. And to me, it's someone that's been overlooked and never should have been. He might be the greatest hog of the greatest unit of offensive linemen ever. It's a travesty that he is not in the Hall of Fame.
I think it's a sex appeal thing. See, Joe Jacoby is a minivan, right? Nobody finds a minivan sexy. They would rather have a Ferrari. And we talked about it. Anthony Munoz was in his class.
No, Anthony Munoz, Zimmerman, like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
some guys that are kind of define their era.
But still don't have accomplishments that he has.
Correct. Yeah.
See, that's the thing about it. And let's be honest, Russ Grimm was more of a talker.
I was finna get to that.
Russ Grimm is more of a talker than Joe Jacoby is. Joe Jacoby is a quiet guy. That's similar to London.
Mm-hmm.
All right? London was not the salesman that Ray is, but he got all the stat that Ray does.
But my question with that is, because I'm gonna ask you this, and that's why I asked you earlier off air, how old were you? By you watching this game from that
Pretty old, I
from
think,
that being that kid in the games and being with your
I'm
father.
the one who went to the art.
Yeah, exactly.
The four of us here, I was actually in that
you
building.
was there.
Yes.
You felt the
Logan
rocking
played there
stand.
too.
I did play that.
Yeah.
you
So
did?
A college game.
Ball game, yeah.
yeah. So being that you was there, you watched, and probably whether it was with a grandfather, your dad, whoever you went to the game with, when you had to compare the two guys, from a Russ Grimm who's in the HOF, and you got Joe Jacoby, who's another guy who we feel that should be there. Compare those two guys. Like, who was the guy on that line?
So the hardest part of comparing, one, they both belong there.
Yeah.
Like this isn't a one was better.
Well, not
than
even
other.
comparing.
Right.
Just say who was the guy that you heard about
The
most?
heartbeat.
Who was the guy that name stood out the most?
Interestingly, it's Joe, and it's not Russ.
Yeah.
Of the Super Bowl championships they went to, the four that they played, he's the only one of the original Hogs that actually played in all of them and won 3 Super Bowls. Not Russ Grimm, not anybody else. So he has the longevity of this career. He played every position on the offensive line outside of center, but he was best known. He was an undrafted rookie free agent who ended up being a starting left tackle and went to 4 straight Pro Bowls, 2 times All-Pro, 4 times in the early 80s. They were top 4 in rushing. Top 4 in rushing.
Yeah.
6 times over a 9-year period, they were top 7 or better. That's Joe Jacoby. They had great running backs. They had a Hall of Famer in John Riggins. They had Gerald Riggs. They had Ernest Biner. They had great running backs that played here. But he's the constant actually through the entire decade. They asked him to do so many different things. So this isn't an indictment of Russ. He belongs there too.
No doubt.
But the player who really defined the dominance of the Hogs, was Joe Jacoby.
So how did he get missed? How you
I
look
don't
over
know.
that?
So I think when you go back and look at the all-decade team, I think that's a pretty good indication of like kind of how people perceived them at the time.
Yeah.
Russ Grimm was considered the second best guard in the NFL at the time.
Yeah.
And Joe Jacoby, according to this list, which is the all-decade team, was considered the 4th best tackle of all time. So whatever, and again, he's playing with Anthony Munoz.
Of that era.
Of that era, of the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And so I think when you look at that and you say like, and this is where I go back to the media, his personality.
Yeah.
Because so much of that to me is dictated by the media and by your personality. And if you're not at the forefront of conversation, you're not in front of a camera, I think people will forget about you. It's kind of like,
No,
it's the same thing that I think about this with Fletch. Like Fletch played in small market teams for a long time.
Yes.
And then he came here and he finally got his
The big
first,
market,
he got his first Pro Bowl.
Yeah.
But like if you're a guy or a media voter or a Hall of Fame voter that looks at, how many Pro Bowls were they in? That's not fair to Fletch.
Yeah,
And that's not fair to Joe.
I also find it hard to have the accolades that Joe have because it all boils down to what have you done. You know what I mean? Yeah. When it's all said and done, what did you do? And if they go down the list and say, if I'm gonna read from man for man, look at the stats, look what he accomplished. That's a Hall of Fame or that's a whatever you want to name it. Then he should get it from there. You shouldn't have to worry about how many times your name was brought up, what market you was in. I'm sure his name was brought up a lot because he went to 4 Super Bowls.
Well, it's interesting too. He's part of.
No, he played in 4. They won 3.
Yeah,
They won
There
3,
we go.
played in
Sorry.
4.
Yeah.
He's the only lineman of the group that
Sorry.
actually played in each and every one of them.
Yeah.
And he played at all these different positions. If you want moments, and this is the hard part for offensive linemen or defensive linemen, often there's no moment
Right.
you can point to.
Yeah.
Well, if you watch what might be the greatest play in Redskins history, which is the John Riggins
Run.
4th and 1 run
Yeah.
in the first Super Bowl championship, guess who the lead blocker is on that, right?
Yeah.
That's Joe Jacoby. Do you want an iconic play? The counter tray is Joe Jacoby.
Yeah.
That he is the one who is pulling. He is one of the kind of forefront of the athletic tackles that you see now.
Yeah.
We went and drafted Josh Connerly. Why? Because he's an athletic tackle that can move. This has become a norm in the NFL now. It wasn't then. Joe Jacoby kind of redefined the position, and the counter tray became the hallmark play of the Washington offense that led to the rushing game that was dominant through the course of a decade. And what you'll see over and over if you watch highlights is 66 pulling and everybody getting out of his way because he was a road grader.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can we agree maybe the NFL didn't like the intro of those two players when they talk about Joe Jacoby and London Fletcher? They both undrafted
This is a great
guys.
point, actually, yeah.
So when you say when they guys was in the draft, we didn't think they was draft worthy, and now they turn out to be Hall of Famers. Did we get it too wrong?
But I don't think that you're getting it wrong. They should lift those guys up and show
We
all the
think
other
like
guys
that, yeah.
that you can honestly be one of these guys one day. You can be undrafted and be considered a great.
Well, if you are either undrafted or a low draft pick at a skill position, you show to the people who you are. Tom Brady clearly is a first ballot Hall of
That's
Famer
what I'm
as
saying.
a 6th round pick,
Yeah.
overlooked his entire career.
Yeah.
For offensive linemen, for defensive linemen, if you're not an edge rusher and you get a bazillion sacks, it is hard to make that case. And it is, I think, hard to overcome that. What's amazing about Jake, too, you know, the Redskins drafted 4 offensive linemen in the 12-round draft before he was taken as an undrafted free agent. There were 28 tackles that were taken in that draft ahead of him, and he ended up starting by his second year and became a dominant all-pro player. That's an amazing, amazing story, and it should be celebrated.
Yeah, but I look at like the other people from this era, from the 80s team, right? It's kind of what I looked at for tackles. There's a guy named Jimbo Covert. He played for the Bears, right?
Yeah.
And so to Fred's point, he was a first-round pick.
Yes.
He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
Hand it to him.
He won a Super Bowl with the Bears. He won the Super Bowl 20 with the Bears.
85.
And he got a recommendation from Bill Parcells basically saying he's the best player that LT played against.
Yeah.
So he got in 2020. And so I do think, as much as we want to think of this process as being totally unbiased,
It is biased.
it's biased. It's
Yeah.
biased
Yeah.
towards
Biased.
people who people recognize and know. You know?
But think about this. They love Tom now. They didn't always love Tom because he was always put against Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
Peyton, the sweet prince of quarterbacking. Like, do you not think they would have rather sell you some stock in Peyton Manning than stock in Tom Brady? Tom just kept that chip on his shoulder because he wasn't a golden boy and said, you know what? I'm going to play it out to the end. All right? I'm going to give it everything I got.
Yeah, let me. You want endorsements? I'll give you that for Joe too. Randy White's in the Hall of Fame. Described Joe Jacoby as one of the greatest offensive linemen he's ever actually faced.
Yeah.
Reggie White, maybe the greatest defensive lineman to ever play the game.
Yes.
Maybe the greatest one to ever play the game, said, quote, "It's a matter of time before he gets into the Hall of Fame, and he is one of the greatest players I've ever had to go up against." Lawrence Taylor,
Yes.
maybe the greatest, most disruptive defensive player in the
Ain't
history
no
of
maybe.
the NFL.
Take that maybe out.
Says
Reggie White.
Joe Jacoby was one of the toughest competitors he ever went against. Think about this too. In the period of time that he played, 7 of the 12 Super Bowls were won by NFC East teams.
Yes.
3 by the Redskins, but 2 by the Giants and 2 by the Cowboys. So he was in the toughest, most dominant division at the time.
Yeah.
He has 76 games against Hall of Fame defensive linemen.
Yes.
His credentials are absurd. And that's why it isn't about making a case for him. It's about explain to me why he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
So how does those votes sway? I've always wondered how much of that leans on the media and how much of it leans
Influence.
on just
It's
'cause
between
I'm saying,
media.
when we first got in the league, they were saying that the media picks a lot of those guys for Hall of Fames, Pro Bowls.
They do.
All Pro.
Media.
There's politics
I
involved.
would say it's politics. It meets media,
that's-
meets coaches too. Like old coaches.
So I want to know what's the percentage? Like how much of
a
that
coach like Parcells has a lot of power to sway. Like if Parcells sits you down and say, this player right here was one of the most dominant players I played against, or what's his name, that weighs a lot.
So all those guys just did that for him, and he's still not in the
You talking about Joe?
Yeah, all those guys from Lawrence Taylor, from Reggie White.
that mean
all
they
those
mean the
guys
Hall of Fame
basically-
people not listening.
That's what I'm saying. So who is the person that's sitting there?
You know, there's a lot to that. Like
That's
every team has an
ridiculous.
advocate. the advocate needs to advocate strongly for the players that have the credentials to do so.
Speak
and
loudly.
they need to have some
that's
political
not
gain within the other voters to say it is time to put our guys in.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous London Fletcher is not in the Hall of Fame.
No, that's
and
absurd.
it's utterly ridiculous.
And B. Mitch.
And B. Mitch.
Absurd.
Once they put Devin Hester into the Hall of Fame,
I was
the
blown.
idea that Brian Mitchell is not is a ridiculous oversight by the group. And in Joe Jacoby's case, here's the most iconic player on the most iconic offensive line who played longer than any of those other players did, and somehow he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
That doesn't even make sense.
So the argument that I've heard
bothers me.
from people is that the 5 Hogs were kind of a sum of the parts. Like what they were as 5 together was better than the individuals.
You can't take that away
And
from me.
The
though.
thing that I've heard, the thing that I've
Sure.
heard from people is that like they wanted to pick a representative from that group to represent this historic group.
And Rex Graham was that representative.
Yeah. So
Because
and
he
again,
was
I believe
because
Joe
he was the
Bugle.
mouth.
I
Because
believe
he
Joe
was the
Bugle
mouth.
should be in the Hall of Fame
He's
as
the-
the
he's
architect
the O-line
of the
coach.
Hogs.
He's the
Yes,
O-line
most
coach.
definitely Joe Bugle should be in there. I got
But
a
like,
chance
what do
to
you
be
say
on
to
the
someone who
step.
says that? Because I always think that's kind of silly.
That still don't
Yeah,
make
that's
sense
silly.
to me.
Like just because we was good as a group, what they mean?
Well, let me ask this question then. Can, I don't know, Torrey Holt,
Well, but you said this.
can two great Isaac
No, no,
Bruce and Torrey
but you
Holt
said
both
this
go into
already.
the Hall
They
of Fame?
should be.
No,
Right.
You
Me
said
and
this
Tanner
already,
talk
though.
about this all the time.
yeah.
Me and Tanner, because it's two groups to compare, right? We got the greatest show on turf.
You got
and I played against
and Lynn Swan.
Yeah, I got them two, which they numbers don't match these other two groups I'm finna talk about. All right, yes, Harrison should be in there. Marvin Harrison. But Reggie Wayne got a case too.
Yeah.
All right, then you got the greatest show on turf with Torrey Holt. Torrey Holt should be in the Hall of Fame, hands down. I don't want to hear that too many people made it. Now, what you hear about the coach is Adrian got in there, Peyton got in there, Marvin got in there. Nobody else can get in there.
But I think the thing that Bram said this already, with skill position people, it's different, right? They have more media availability, right? They are more
can see the
outward facing.
stats.
I can go,
Yes.
you can, how we talk about receivers you like, right? You go through and you look at the stats. And with offensive linemen, it's like, I had to go back and watch cut-ups of film, promoting the Hogs. And I was like, oh my gosh, like Joe Jacoby, Ram talked about this, his ability to move and pull and get to the second level, like it felt different than anybody else of the era.
That's why I find it hard to say that if this guy was that dominant and all those guys who are greats in this league who we consider the best of the best back in those days have vouched for him, who's dropped the ball on getting this guy to the Hall of Fame? And you said it. It got to come from the team now. It's something that, because it's so crazy that even with the whole Devin Hester thing, Deion Sanders helped tremendously with that whole thing going on.
That's
He
right.
talked about Devin every year. He vouched, talked about what this guy has done. And it's a lot of, look, this is the crazy part about it. When the whole thing came out and Devin got up there and spoke about the other guys, I was like, thank you, Devin. You understand, because leading up to when everybody heard that he was going to be, in and get his jacket, a lot of people was disgruntled knowing that he didn't stand up there on the list when it comes to the top 10 in kick returns and punt returns. Now, he had touchdowns when it came to
but not the yards.
Not the yards. So I love the fact that he went up there and humbled himself and say, look, man, I'm just the first guy, but there's plenty of other guys that done this or done it better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm the first guy that got in. So getting back to Joe Jacoby, man, I just find it hard to see a guy, and I didn't watch the Hogs back then. I was too young. But to hear the stuff and just to see some of the footage about how dominant he was, and then you say this guy, it almost reminded me of when Lynn Swan went in way before Stallworth, and Stallworth was the one that averaged 1,000 yards a season, and Lynn Swan was just known for the great Super Bowl heroic catches.
I would say his playoff.
He caught the exciting heroic catches, but Stallworth was the staple. He was the number one receiver.
That's right.
He led that receiver corps, and he goes in by the time I'm in my 10th year in the league.
Listen,
you know what I'm saying? So it's like, this is ridiculous.
I mentioned Gary Clark earlier. So
Yes.
I believe that Gary Clark is one of the most underrated players that's ever come through the NFL, let alone this franchise. It took a long time for Art Monk to get into the Hall of Fame, even though his stats were so overwhelmingly dominant that it was ridiculous. It took as long as it did. And I think part of it was the personality. He didn't like talking to the media.
Say Art was just so quiet.
Right. But then once he got in, again, this was one of those political things where, well, we're not going to put both of them into the Hall of Fame. And I don't subscribe to, I think you let everybody's career stand on its own.
Bingo.
And just because a team was lucky enough to have 2 Hall of Fame offensive linemen, why would you punish one of them over the other because you have some kind of quota of how many people can get in? His greatness stands on its own. Can I give you one more? Give
us as many as you want.
You are
Give me a
selling this product.
Okay.
I want to hear.
So, in the first championship, this is actually amazing. You know, his mom died while he was in his rookie camp.
I didn't know that.
So he played through the season, and it was his mother's birthday on the day of the Super Bowl that they won. So
Yes.
there's a background story here for Joe.
Yeah.
In that 82 playoffs, you know, Saquon Barkley broke just about every rushing record. He did not break the postseason rush record, which is still held by John Riggins.
Wow.
That year, 610 yards in one postseason. That still stands. Good luck anybody chasing that down, especially if Saquon's not going to do it off of the year that he just had. That's the Hogs. That's Joe Jacoby. That's also the great John Riggins.
Yeah.
A year later, in his mid-30s, John Riggins rushes for 24 rushing touchdowns. Now, he's a great and belongs in the Hall of Fame. That's also Joe Jacoby and the Hogs, allowing for something like that to occur at an advanced age. In 1987, Timmy Smith broke the Super Bowl record for rush yards in a game.
Yeah.
That's Joe Jacoby
Yeah.
and the Hogs in the same game. You guys are going to talk to Doug Williams, which is the greatest quarter that's ever been played by any team.
Any team.
18 plays, 35 points,
Yes.
350 yards of offense. That'll never get touched. That's Joe Jacoby and the Hogs, too.
man.
That's the whole operation.
Something
In
wrong.
1991, they played 19 games. They gave up 9 sacks. 9.
Yeah.
This isn't even the original Hogs anymore.
Yeah.
This is Joe Jacoby and a completely new set of players that
Something
they're doing
wrong.
this with.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous that he's not in the Hall of Fame. He, in 4 Super Bowls, never gave up a sack, and in 14 playoff games, gave up 2. We're talking about the best of the best at these
And
moments.
he's playing Lawrence Taylor
Yes.
and Reggie White. He's playing the
wrong.
best players of all
Twice a
time.
year.
Yes. Yes.
It don't make no sense. I mean, and it's honest to say because, and I'm glad we're making this case for Joe because I feel like this is something that we can talk about from a lot of guys. There's a lot of guys that when we grew up watching, whether they was skilled guys or not, that I feel like don't get enough credit. So I honestly think it's something broken with the Hall of Fame. I guess with guys getting voted in or whoever is the guy that's supposed to be,
It's a popularity contest.
and that's wrong.
Don't
because when it
reward
comes to just
the
the numbers
people.
alone,
Yeah.
you have to reward these people, man. These people fought hard, made it through certain circumstances to be a professional player, then to go out there and play on the top tier level and don't get the credit for when they leave the game because that's all you want as a player. You want to be recognized for the good or bad you did.
And
you're
then,
done.
why not recognize the past anyway? Because these guys didn't have a chance to make $80 million. All right, when you get that HOF on your name, that gives them revenue that comes in differently. Like, so to pay homage to these guys, this is more serious to them than I think it is to some guys that played in our time. Because if you win, lose, or draw, you was rewarded in some form or fashion. They were rewarded by being remembered. And the Hall of Fame is about remembering people. How we going to remember the Hogs without Joe Jacoby?
It's really interesting. Like, so the Redskins were a dynasty back in the 1980s, and they were really led by this offensive line. But, think about how many players from those years actually got into the Hall of Fame. It's actually quite small. Like Joe Gibbs, the head coach, is in. John Riggins, but he only played in the early stretches of it. He didn't play in those other Super Bowls. The last 3 Super Bowls, he wasn't even part of those teams.
Darryl
Who
Green.
else? Art Monk got in. Darryl Green got in. That's it. That's it. The Patriots, who have been a dynasty here up through the Brady-Belichick era, the same thing's going to happen. There's only going to be a select few of these guys that actually get into the Hall of Fame. They're going to be having these discussions about some of those players too. Their team dominance is being overlooked for the sole specialties that the players brought to it. Like, Dexter Manley could be in the Hall of Fame.
Easily.
Right?
How's
Charles Mann could be in the Hall of Fame.
Mark Mosley won an MVP as a kicker, man.
Mark Mosley could be in the Hall of Fame. Gary Clark could be in the Hall of Fame. But because of their team dominance and because they were a humble team, actually, with the few exceptions of the personalities on the
See,
team.
they needed me, Bram.
Right.
They needed me.
They needed you.
They needed me.
If you played on those teams,
I would have sold. I would have sold them.
They'd have lost 2 Super Bowls.
I would have sold us though. I would have sold my teammates because that's why I'm on him about London all the time. Because I appreciate the value of work that he did, and for him not. We're talking about 2 of the best. No, I ain't gonna say 2 of. I'm gonna go out of the line and say right now, Joe Jacoby and London Fletcher are the two best, 1A and 1B best undrafted players of all time. They are the number 1 and 2 best undrafted players of all time.
It's interesting talking about this because I think it highlights a problem.
It bothers me.
It highlights a problem in the NFL. You were talking about the Hall of Fame, but I do think like it's really hard to quantify offensive line play.
Yeah.
And so even when you're looking at the media, for example, like you're relying on another person's perspective to inform your perspective, especially if you're a media member. You know what I mean? And so I look at it, I'm like, so today, I'm sure we could all name the top 5 running backs, probably name the top 5 wide receivers.
Yeah.
Could you name the top 5? We are analysts for a team. Could you name the top 5 offensive linemen in the NFL?
I could.
Yeah, you could, but can the average fan do that? Because
no.
there's no fantasy football for them.
But
I also feel, I ain't mean to cut you off, Fred.
No, you good. You
know,
good.
there's always a apologize.
No, you good. I don't.
No, honestly, I just feel like it also shouldn't relies in the hands of someone who covers us.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong. I have nothing against the media. I'm now a part of the media. I just feel like there's conflict of interest at times.
Some bias. It's some bias in there.
Because you get some guys, like you say, who's soft spoken. So that beat writer might feel like, you know what, he never talked to me, so I'm not voting for him. You know, and vice versa. I've seen it done.
Yeah.
I've seen a guy put front page news, and I was a bust before I even got a chance to speak to him because I couldn't speak to him. You know what I mean? Because he just had a bias about me. So when it comes to, you know, rewarding me, I shouldn't be rewarded by someone who's writing about us. I should be rewarded by the league that I'm in and the players and the coaches that I either played with or played against.
I will say to that, like, of the people who are in the room doing the voting, they're typically not the hot take artists who go in those directions with their careers. That said, it takes the right advocates on behalf of the team.
Yeah.
And clearly, this team has not had, and I'm not being dismissive of the people who do it because it's a hard job. There are people like Joe Jacoby. It's absurd that he's not in the Hall of Fame. Therefore, they're not being advocated for properly.
Yeah.
Because the case that we're telling here, I could go on and on about this.
Yeah.
He is singularly one of the greatest offensive linemen in the history of the NFL, and I would defy anybody in that room in Canton to argue with me about it, which is why I say, tell me why you're not putting him in when you know
it's a problem
what I know about him.
It's a problem then. Is the problem newness and forgetting about the past, or the problem is the process in order to get in?
Yeah.
Because
I think it's both, actually.
yeah, it's a little bit of both. It meets both worlds collide.
It's so many guys that, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but we talk about this all the time with receivers. We name names, the Jimmy Smiths, the Irvin Fryers. Like, these are names that you probably, oh man, I forgot about those guys.
Yeah.
The number speaks for themselves.
But like Jimmy Smith is a good example.
I know the off-field stuff.
But even the numbers by itself, he played in a small market.
Yeah.
And so
but I understand that. But I'm saying, like, when it comes down to just what did I do?
Yeah.
Forget the market, forget the notoriety that I get.
Market.
What did I do? When it's all said and done, you're going to compare my stats to everybody else that's up here.
Yeah.
What did I do? Do I get enough credit? Should I play? Should I be up there with
But
him?
you know what Jimmy got in common with the two guys we're talking about? He was lowly drafted.
Yeah.
Like, it's something about that. We didn't put you on a pedestal then.
But it
we ain't gonna put you on one
it
now.
Be that because you lift these guys up to make your brand what it is. When they was playing well, when they had good games or big games, primetime games, I'm pretty sure, you know, the Joe Jacobys of the world who played, like you just said, the stats are ridiculous. It speaks for itself. Regardless if he's an offensive lineman or not, regardless if you have an offensive lineman already that's supposed to be their spokesperson, which I never heard anything like that in my life. If you put in the work and you went out there and you considered the best at what you do, you should get the credit.
I think that's the problem here with Joe. If I was going to kind of try to pinpoint it, right?
Yeah.
Because he's playing in an era where he was not the guy on the pedestal, right? It was what's his name from Cincinnati? Munoz was the guy, right? And so
Anthony Munoz.
That's where it's so funny with if you look at the first ballot guys. I'm not saying Joe Jacoby should have been a first ballot guy, but when you look at those guys, it's all tackles that define an era. Your Jackie Slaters, your Munozes, your
Joe Thomas. I love Joe, but no.
But he was the best tackle of his era.
They won nothing.
But he didn't win anything. But it's like Tanner was just talking about individual performance, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the other thing here that's tough with Joe is like there's all these other great players, right? And you can't put everybody in. But he's also part of a great team.
Yeah, and it
does take some of his shine, I think, too.
Go ahead. Can I ask you something else?
No, you
Bram?
can't. No, go ahead.
Do you think that this thing will have to be changed sooner or later, as far as the Hall of Fame? I feel like it's They don't want a lot in, but there's so many guys that
The process has to change.
It has
Yeah,
to.
I think
Because you've been around a long time following this game. I wonder that. Do you guys question that?
I don't think it's going to change. I don't know. And again, like as someone who's, never been a player and, wants to think that we know the game as well and are kind of stewards of it, caretakers of it. That's how I look at it from my position. I'm a caretaker of telling the story of this team. And I hope that people value that, even though I never put on the uniforms like you guys did. And, so I think like, I'm protective of the idea that people in my position who cover this for a living and follow it really should have a voice in the room about it. That said, I do believe more ex-players should have a say and maybe of equal weight to the media or the advocates for the teams to do so because they played and they know. So when you sit there and you go, Reggie White, Randy White, and Lawrence Taylor and Bruce Smith are saying he's one of the best players ever. How is not convincing you? Maybe they should be in the room. Yeah. R.I.P. Reggie White, obviously.
Yeah.
But like,
When you make
maybe
these
they
picks.
should be in the room saying, wait a minute here.
Yeah.
Why don't we speak up? We're wearing the jackets.
Yeah.
We played against this guy. Maybe we should have a vote too. So I could see where an expansion of voices in the room, specifically from the Hall of Famers themselves and ex-players who, still follow and are very close to the game, have a voice in the room about this because this would stop, I think, some of these types of players, especially in this case, from being overlooked.
Well, can I ask you this? The Hogs, you said maybe they don't want to do it because it's a named group and they already got a representative. But why you
They got a couple. Actually, the Hogettes are in the Hall of Fame too.
Get
the hell out of here.
Well, think about this.
As like great fans of all time. Yes.
Let's talk about some more name groups. The Steel Curtain.
Yeah.
Multiple guys in there. The Purple People Eaters. Minnesota
All
Vikings.
4 of those guys in?
With the Purple People.
The D-line?
Yeah, I think so. All right, then you
Jim
got
Marshall, Alan Page are both in the Hall of Fame.
both in there. So we can go through these names of these remembered groups, but out of all those groups, this is the only group with one representative.
Well, I mean, the Steel Curtain's got how many?
6 guys.
Jack Ham, Jack Lambert.
Almost all of them. Mean Joe Green.
Right.
All of them.
Right. And so in the case of the Hogs, it is kind of absurd, actually, that there is only one that is in the Hall of Fame. It kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because, when you're doing research, and again, this is maybe because, Bram said make an argument as to why not, right? One of the things that I heard was that they protected him a lot in the system, right? He had tight end help, back help. They ran the ball a ton. They kind of insulated him. You know what I mean? And it's funny to think
when Lawrence Taylor is rushing against you, sometimes you might get help.
But we can laugh about it.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. And then you compare him to Thorpe, the other guy that I mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And Bill Parcells comes out and says, "Oh, he's the best tackle that LT had to play against." It's just a different perspective. And I think that's why this is so hard. Is it's so subjective. And I think even good players will disagree about what is good. You would the best player I played against is probably not someone anybody's ever heard of.
Yeah.
Right? He just gave me fits.
Yeah.
Probably same with you, right?
Yeah,
And so
I
that's where
played against some guys that my talent didn't fit to check this person.
Yeah. Or the scheme didn't fit that person or whatever it is.
They still have to have the career longevity and the stats to prove that they're part of this.
But what's the stat for the O-line, though?
Wait, here go think
That's
about
my
it.
thing with, you can't stat an O-line.
But he told you he authored the counter tray, a play that still ran today.
But then the coach gets credit for the schematic element of it.
Well,
You know what I'm saying?
if that's the
And
case,
and
put
again,
Joe
coaches
Bruger
in the
there.
Hall of Fame.
Yeah, put Joe Bruger in there then.
I think Jacoby deserves to be in there. But I think if you're in the room, you just say, oh well, there's other ways. Other people deserve his success.
You have to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
You have to do it.
Yeah. And
This has happened with other groups. Like Joe DeLamielleure just went into the Hall of Fame, I don't know, 5 years ago. He's maybe the best offensive lineman from the Electric Company. That's O.J. Simpson behind the Buffalo Bills offense and all those. Well, nobody knows who he is anymore because it went along so long. This is what's happened to Joe Jacoby.
Yeah.
People forget how great the Hogs were and how
Aged
great
out.
he was.
Yes.
So when I say Joe DeLamielleure, nobody knows who that is.
Yeah,
he was the best offensive lineman on the Bills, but because O.J. Simpson was so magnificent, they thought it was him, not them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. but credit has to be handed out because it's us.
Correct.
But
This is a team game.
People try to make football so singular, and it has more athletes than any other sport playing at one time. And you try to make us singular.
All right, think about this right now. Like, the Eagles have the best offensive line in football.
Yeah,
Was that all Saquon Barkley last year? Of course not. Of course not.
If he didn't have that line, half of that
That
would be done.
number
None of
that
that
he
happened.
posted
Yes.
last year would not be behind a ridiculously bad offensive line.
Never would have happened.
Right.
But this goes back to my other point. Like, could you name the top 4 tackles in the NFL right now?
Yeah, Pino Sewell. You got Sewell.
Okay.
You got Trent Williams.
Mailata.
You got Mailata, and you got Lance Johnson, and you got Tunsil.
Lane Johnson, right?
Yeah.
So those are the 4 that come up. And of those guys that go, when they decide or when it's time for them to go in the Hall of Fame, how it goes, according to history.
Lance Johnson will
Well,
probably be first.
This is a good one because the Eagles are going to get 2 guaranteed. Jason Kelsey's going to go in the Hall of Fame, and Lane Johnson's going to go in the Hall of
Johnson's
Fame.
going.
Yeah.
They
So that's
going.
2.
Yeah.
Well,
Right?
centers have a weird history of not going.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
But
But
I think
Jason Kelsey is
Kelsey's so incredibly popular.
popular, yes. He's
Yes.
different
That goes
than
back to the
any center
underlying
we've
point.
had. Yeah.
But we could talk about this all day long.
Yeah.
Bram, thank you so much for joining us.
My
Really
pleasure.
appreciate your
Take your
insight.
time,
You
brother.
did a great pitch for it. Thank you so much. And now we're going to bring in somebody who's played with him. and
Needs
can
no
talk-
introduction.
Can talk about the man himself.
Yeah.
So we'll get that going.
Bram, way to sell that, Bram.
He going in after Bramson.
Yeah, Bram made a case, baby.
All right, now we're back, and Doug Williams joins us, the man that needs no introduction. And
The one
it's
and the only.
It's so fun to have guys like Doug in the building because we can talk to Bram, who's watched the team as a little kid.
Yeah.
But to have a guy who played with Joe Jacoby
Played with him.
Yeah.
and had a really historic career in his own right.
Who he protected.
It's awesome for you to be here, Doug. Thanks for joining us, man.
Oh,
Appreciate
thanks for having me.
it. So yeah, we're talking about Joe.
Yeah.
And if you so for someone who's never seen Joe play, like I'm too young. I never saw him play. I've watched a little bit of film getting ready for this, but it's all that grainy cut up stuff. How would you describe Joe Jacoby?
You know what? When I first got here in '86, man, I knew I was coming to a team with a great offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got a chance when I first got here just to sit back and just watch guys move around. You look at Joe. Joe's a big old guy. You know, wasn't the most athletic guy, but he got the job done. You know, you didn't beat him inside, you didn't beat him outside because of his size.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a guy that was undrafted. And that says a lot too, man. Come in and then become that starter, man. And when I got an opportunity to play, my backside was something I know did worry about.
Yeah, you're right, because it's a very intimate relationship between left tackle and quarterback.
Yeah.
Like for you to back up all of those times to pass that ball and never think twice. And we're talking about some of the best pass rushers this game never saw. We talking about Reggie White. We talking about Lawrence Taylor. We talking about the highest of competition. How did he gain your trust from the first mini camp, or did you just say, you know what, this guy got this. Let me push the ball down the field.
I think coming in already a veteran, it was my job to gain their confidence.
All right.
And that's what I did. You know, whether or not it was Joe, whether or not it was Mark May, whether or not it was Russ, anybody that was up front, I had trust in them because the way they had played earlier. I had a chance to see them play before I got here, and I think that's made for it. But to see those guys play at the level that they played at, and see Joe, play at the level that he played at. Joe is the only guy that, the time I played here with Coach Gibbs, the only guy Coach Gibbs would never put a play in that you couldn't block it. But he was the only guy that he left single-handed with Lawrence Taylor.
Yeah.
The only guy that I've seen him without a tight end on his side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with all that being said,
That says everything.
Well, it's crazy because like when you hear people talk about it, like, oh, we got all this tight end help, but then to get it from the horses.
And then you get it from Doug.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
I would
And you
just
get the real information.
I'm reading through it, and it's like, oh, that's the criticism, but like obviously, that's a different story.
But quite naturally, we had offense where the guy moved left, moved right.
Sure.
But there was time when it was just him and Lawrence over there.
Yeah.
And nobody worried about that. I
That's
didn't. I mean, because of what Joe had did early, and I believed in Joe.
So tell me, from all these years of you just watching certain guys getting the credit, who didn't get the credit, and some of the guys who've got in there early, especially nowadays, I scratch my head when I see all these young guys that's getting pushed to the
in there.
forefront. What was it, or what is it that we can't sit here and say that, Joe's not in yet.
Well, I said this a long time ago. When you think about the offensive line that we had here for a decade or more, and you only got one guy in there, in Rush Grimm, there is nowhere in the world when you see other teams got 2 and 3 guys in the Hall of Fame that we should not have at least 2 guys in the Hall of Fame. And for Joe not to be in there, I think is a travesty.
Yeah,
that's a great point. I mean, Bram said something similar, and I think it's like, again, like how do you capture how good the group was?
Because like we talked about the named groups.
Yeah.
We talked about the steel curtain. We talk about the purple people eaters. And usually when you in as a group, you usually go 1, 2, 3, 4. Like they just continue to put you in. But this seems to be the group that constants get overlooked. And I don't know if it's a franchise thing. I don't know if it's a newness thing. Because the one thing we can generationally do is forget about the past. Not unmistakably, but forget about the past.
And I think that, it's been a long time ago, 30-some years ago, and I think that's unfortunate. But they also got to recognize what that offensive line did, and especially what Joe did at the left tackle.
Yeah.
When we talk about Hall of Famers, a guy that played for 10 years or more at left tackle and did it well.
Yeah.
You can't overlook him.
Bram said something about us pushing that more too. Like, do you think as an organization we can do a better job with
push the agenda,
kind of trying to put it back on the forefront when it comes to just, every year, like, hey, you got guys like Gary, you got guys like B. Mitch, you got guys like London and Joe. I think I'm not sure how far does it go when it comes to saying that you got like one more year before you can just be,
before you can get in.
I was talking to Fletch about this. Yeah,
he said something about
I think he's in the senior category.
Senior category might be in there now.
So we almost to the point where they're going to just forget about him.
And then he come up in the senior. You got so many guys that's in that senior category from way back when.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem. But, if Joe is in the senior category, they should put him in the front of the line.
Yeah, I think that kind of messes up. Because, when you get that yellow jacket, it gives you money-making power.
Yeah.
That some guys in the past probably never have. And to rob him of that, trying to do it in his senior years, I think it's the worst thing about it to me. And let me ask you this, Doug. Did y'all ran the counter tray, right?
Yes, we did.
All right. And he's known for that counter tray, a play that we run today.
Let me tell you this, and I'll tell them people, we talk about the Super Bowl that he played in. We ran the 60 counter tray, man. Joe Jacoby came around the side, seal his guy inside, not a soul touched Timmy Smith. Not one soul.
Yeah.
I'm talking about completely wiped
when he broke the record, right?
Completely wiped it out.
Yeah.
That in itself says what Joe Jacoby's all about. If you don't believe me, go get that film and you'll see against Denver that when he came around pulling he pulled from his left tackle coming all the way to the right side and sealed that whole side in.
So obviously he's a great player, right? Like how was he as a teammate? How was he?
Man, let me tell you can't get a better teammate. All those guys. Yeah. All those guys, man, that, nobody that you couldn't sit down and talk to about anything. Joe Jacoby to me gonna always be somebody special. I'm gonna tell you why. Because when I was dragging my leg off the field at the Super Bowl, Joe Jacoby walked up to me and he told me, he said, "Hey, Doug Williams," he said, "white, green, or yellow." He said, "I don't care what they say, you our quarterback." To me, I thought that was
everything.
Special.
Yeah. Especially in that moment.
In that moment.
In that heat of that moment
That's
there.
Right.
Most
That's cool, man. Yeah. And so as obviously on the field, he was a certain way, kind of probably like a pretty rough and tumble kind of guy, or.
Well, you know what?
Or what
all 5 of them guys up there was something to talk about, man.
They was feisty, huh?
They was feisty. But you know what the good thing about it?
Man.
They believe that they can do anything that Joe and Buse asked them to do. They can move them. They feel like they can move a mountain if you have to block it.
That would look like
they came to huddle, man, and they didn't talk in the huddle. They listened to their quarterback, and when they got what they had to do and they went to the line, they was ready to go.
And then I think the other question is do you have anything off the field? Because, they had that little tent outside where they hang out.
No, I thought it was the RV.
It
was the RV, the Rigo RV.
No, they had a house.
It was right here, right down the thing.
No, we wasn't here. We was at a place down on the other side of the airport.
All right.
And the guy who kept up with the field, they had a house. He was the guy that go get the beer and stuff like that.
So there was an actual house.
Oh yeah, where they keep all the laminates. They had sofa, chairs, everything in there.
Yeah,
but I wasn't invited.
I
let me say that.
I remember Coach.
Because if you under 300 pounds, you can't come in.
No, it was only one guy invited that didn't play offensive line. A tight end.
Riggs?
That was rigging.
Oh my
All right.
We were quarterback? You can't go in there,
I can
man.
see rigging.
Ain't nowhere in the world Joe Thies and Mia Rip was going to go in there. We wasn't invited.
Yeah, listen, I understand. That's their domain.
But you know what? That's the respect that everybody had for each other.
Yeah.
That was their clique. You had the posse. You had the fun bunch.
Yeah.
Everybody had their little clique, man.
Yeah, most definitely.
And they believed in each other, and they got together, and they had fun, and they blocked people to death.
They did what they was asked to do.
That's right.
And so, two things. I think we can answer this question together. What made him special, like as a person, and then why do you think he should be in the Hall of Fame?
Well, as a person, Joe was a down-to-earth guy. Talked to anybody.
Big old teddy bear.
Got along. You just said you hit the nail on the head.
Because I done met him several times.
You hit the nail on the head. Nothing malicious about Joe at all. Nothing at all.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say he should be in the Hall of Fame, I think you look across the board and you see some of the guys that are, and I'm not taking anything away from the guys that are going in there.
Yeah.
But there's no way in the world that Jacoby should not be in the NFL Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a better endorsement than that. Like, you know, Tanny, you were talking about this?
Yeah.
Like how you want the players to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a better way to kind of get that endorsement from a guy who played with him.
Yeah.
And say that, like, he deserves this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, cut out all the media, the personality, all that
Ben
stuff.
deserved it.
Yeah.
Ben deserved it.
Wholeheartedly, you know, and you're talking about a guy that, you know, like I told people all the time, we all getting in our twilights.
Yeah.
And this is a great time for Joe Jacoby to get his flowers, man.
To be celebrated.
And not just get this flower,
Yeah.
he deserves his flowers.
Yes, most
And I
definitely.
think that's how you got to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in addition to Joe Jacoby.
Yeah, we got new news too.
Yeah, deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I
Yeah.
also think it's important that Doug Williams gets recognized. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? And this is a little bit surprise. So I know,
Sit
Doug,
back, Doug.
you
Sit
don't,
back.
you don't like this kind of stuff.
Yeah, sit back.
But there's a new thing in the Hall of Fame, historical contribution. And obviously, your resume is tremendous. Super
Yes.
Bowls, championship games, all that
Oh
stuff.
no, we talking all HBCU.
Yeah.
We talking about your effect from Jaden Daniels to Michael Vicks to the Randall Cunninghams of the world.
Because
We
he
ta-
was the first.
Oh yes, we talking about the way you nurtured football throughout Louisiana and this area. Tell them what we got.
No, I'm just saying, like that's you said it. You
Oh, my
sold
fault. All right.
it. No, because like I look at again, like football is a game, obviously.
Yeah.
But there's sometimes something more than a game.
Some people bigger than the game.
And the moments that Joe Jacoby's talking about, like, doesn't matter what color you are, you're our quarterback.
Yeah.
And that starts a whole generation of young people
Yeah.
looking and saying, I can do that.
I can do that.
And I think that that's extremely special. And Joe, Doug, I'm sorry I put you on the spot.
Yeah.
But it's just cool
y'all
to be sitting
ambushed me then.
but it's cool to be sitting in the same room as you. You know what I'm saying?
It's a good ambush.
Yeah.
And what we saying is, like, you are being considered for a historical tribute to the NFL Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Which is you should
Which
be.
is unbelievable.
But it's deserving.
No, it's deserving, most definitely.
And so I know you got a lot of stuff going on, Doug. You just came in from practice, watching players, mentoring people. So thank you so much for joining.
It's my
Really
pleasure.
appreciate it, especially for us. Thanks for talking about Joe, and thanks for being you and being around the building. Appreciate
Well,
it.
it's my pleasure, but y'all could have told me y'all was going to hit me over the head.
Hey, we hit your head. We just got the news, and I told them we want to be the first to let you know this news. So congratulations, especially knowing that you also, and I hope they do it at the same exact time with you and Joe Jacoby, because that'll really make it
man.
special for
That would
Washington
be
Nation.
unbelievable. That'd be
Congratulations, you have and will and are considered to be a Hall of Famer very soon, sir.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Anytime.